Hi and welcome to the Smith Employment Podcast. My name is Tabytha Cunningham and I'm an associate in the employment team. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Oh, hi, I'm Claire Merritt and I'm a partner in the employment team here at Smith.
So in today's podcast, we're going to be looking at managing mental health in the workplace. Poor mental health is one of the biggest issues in the workplace today, and the pandemic certainly hasn't helped matters in that respect. It's placed us all under additional stress, and it's removed a lot of the existing support networks that we have to help us when things are getting on top of us. And it's also made it much more difficult for employers to manage mental health in the workplace because we're simply not seeing our employees in the same way, and lots of people are working at home or suffering from different issues that they haven't previously experienced. Mental ill health is a significant issue for employers in terms of things like staff productivity. It can cause issues with staff retention, and obviously it's a big cause of sickness absence, and over half of the absences that are recorded in the UK are connected in some way to mental ill health at work. So it's a really important issue for employers to get on top of. And today we're going to be looking at ways that you can manage mental health in the workplace to improve life at work for both yourself as an employer and for your employees.
So I'm going to talk through the format of today. What we've done is we've gone out to contacts and clients and asked their key questions about mental health or mental health in the workplace. We've also gathered together the questions that we most commonly get asked. So hopefully there'll be a really good guide for you as we go through this podcast. So, Tabytha, my first question for you is, what do we mean by managing mental health at work?
I mean, I think it's a really important distinction to make that we're really talking about two issues at the same time. The first is kind of maintaining good mental health at work for everybody. So we're looking at proactively how we can make your workplace a good place to work, how we can prevent issues occurring in the first place by managing people's workload and making sure that they're supportive, and really what we can do as preventative measures to stop issues occurring in the first place. We've then got the second kind of string to it, which is managing employees that are already suffering from a mental health illness. So someone that's suffering from stress or anxiety or depression, for example, and that may be affecting them at work, or it may be something that they need our support with at work. So that's when we're looking at things like managing performance issues connected to mental ill health, and when we're obliged to make reasonable adjustments to support employees that might also be disabled, which we'll talk about a little bit later on. So we're talking about the proactive steps to reduce issues occurring, and then the reactive steps that we have to take as employers when we are faced with issues.
And so I think that's a really good point, Tabytha. There are actually, a lot of people think about mental health, it's a real negative. It's a negative as part of their organisation, but actually supporting well-being and supporting your staff is not a bad thing at all. It's actually a real positive and can be seen as a real differentiator for you as an organisation, as an employer.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking after people's mental health proactively is a really important part of your workplace culture. Ideally, you want your workplace to be a place where your employees feel heard, and that they have a voice and that they're supported at work. And absolutely, there's a good side to it, as well as the difficulties that employers experience in dealing with the more negative situations, which can be difficult. So looking at that side, one of the questions we often get asked, Claire, I think, is when employers are liable for work-related stress, and there's this concern that if an employee says that they're stressed at work, there must be a claim there that we need to be aware of. So do you want to talk us through the risk factors and where employers are in terms of liabilities there?
So I think it's really important to understand that there are several elements to this. There are your employment law obligations to treat those who may be disabled in a certain way. And we're going to talk about that in a bit more detail later on. But then there are also obligations for health and safety, but also obligations under personal injury law. So if you cause an injury to your employee at work. Now, it's pretty unusual for an employer to be liable for stress in the workplace, unless there's a particularly vulnerable employee who an employer hasn't taken their concerns seriously and hasn't addressed them. That's that's pretty unusual. However, there are still obligations on an employer to undertake risk assessments around stress. So there are positive obligations under the health and safety regulations to minimise stress in the workplace and undertake those risk assessments in the workplace. So employers do need to be mindful that they have an obligation to monitor risk and reduce risk around stress, albeit being automatically concerned you're going to be liable for a personal injury claim is probably a little bit unlikely. However, really great document for helping managing your stress and sorting through risk assessments and those sorts of things is the Managing and Supporting Mental Health at Work, which is a Mind document, so Mind, the mental health charity, and it really looks at some of those issues that would exacerbate stress, such as long hours, unrealistic expectations, deadlines, high pressure work environments, but also things like job insecurity, job change, and lone working. And we're in a really unusual situation at the moment in the pandemic where lone working has become the norm. In fact, we're being encouraged to lone work by the government, required in some cases, and job insecurity and change is all around us as well. So there's a really different sheen on it at the moment during this pandemic, which adds an extra layer of complication. And I do have some clients who have actually done a specific COVID-19 mental health risk assessment, and I think that's something to be thought about. Maybe it's a bit late, we're a year in, but there certainly are issues there that need to be thought about.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that lone working and working from home is still going to be a part of our lives for quite a long time, isn't it? Whether that's part of a phased return or employees looking to do it more permanently. So I think it's definitely looking at how we support managers with providing that day-to-day support when they're not seeing an employee physically in the same way that we used to. I mean, I think that feeds into some of our general top tips, which is another one of our questions in terms of what managers can do to proactively encourage good mental health at work. I mean, I think they really are quite simple, and sometimes the simple things are overlooked. I know one of the things really for managers is to make sure that they're checking in with their employees regularly, not just about work-related tasks, but having catch-ups as to how employees are doing, both individually and as a team as well. So there is that support network around people, and you can identify early on whether someone's struggling, and trying your best remotely, which I appreciate is more difficult, to create that positive atmosphere where conversation is encouraged. Because I don't know about you, Claire, but often I think employees just say they don't feel heard, they don't feel that they didn't feel that they could ask for help when it was needed because they were concerned about a negative attitude there. So making it clear that you are open to chat when needed, I think is often underestimated as one of the most important things.
It certainly is, but and I'm sure we've both dealt with cases where actually people are concerned about their long-term prospects within an organisation if they talk about their mental health. But absolutely, everybody has mental health, just as we all have physical health. You wouldn't expect your job prospects to change if you broke your leg. So hopefully, you shouldn't, and that should be the culture in the workplace.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the good thing about the pandemic is there's even more resources available than ever online to support employees, and I think encouraging employees to use the support tools that are available to them, either internally if you're a larger employer and you have access to things like occupational health or employee assistance schemes, but also the kind of wealth of information that there is online. I know we've found that Solent Mind resources can be really useful for employees and employers, and there's lots of help out there. So I think encouraging employees, if you can't help to access those other support tools as a manager, can be really important. And I think coming back to your point, Claire, it is that making sure there's a positive work-life balance being encouraged, because it is often the excessive hours and employees feeling out of control at work that leads to these issues occurring. So making sure that managers are encouraging employees to take their breaks, encouraging them to shut down at the end of the day, and make sure there is that divide, even though we're all staying at home and it's becoming more blurred, is really important.
I think that's entirely true, because in particular home working, the barriers are really blurry, and actually it's important for managers to encourage them to be as maintained as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there are obviously wider steps that employers can take. And one thing that's becoming more popular for larger employers certainly is looking at whether you appoint mental health first aiders in the same way that you would train employees in the office to provide help if there's a physical issue, providing training to mental health first aiders so that there is another person outside of their manager that they can contact if there is an issue. And I think, again, that can often help with the stigma issue that you mentioned, Claire, in terms of employees might not want to contact their manager for fear that they'll be seen as not coping, but actually being able to raise their concerns with someone else in the organisation that's received training and can point to further helpful resources if it's not something that they can assist with, can be really useful, and is certainly something that employers should look into.
So, and as you know, Tabytha, I'm a mental health first aider.
Yeah.
I haven't had as much opportunity to be a mental health first aider actually since we've all been home working. It's just seems that that connection and that's something that's a challenge, obviously, that all of those who are home working face. But fundamentally, being a mental health first aider is about signposting people who have had a crisis, had an issue at work, and signposting them in the right directions, because there's lots of help and support out there for people. And as a mental health first aider, you're not able to give counselling or or be able to solve everyone's problems, but you can certainly help point them in the right direction. And having a kind of a team of people that can do that in your organisation is really helpful.
Absolutely. And as you say, I think employers sometimes feel they've got to help an employee with everything, and that's not your role as an employer. Your role is to support the employee as best as you can with their life at work, and often that's going to require the help of other professionals as well on a personal level. I mean, moving on to when poor mental health becomes a health concern, do you want to talk, Claire, about when mental health can be classed as a disability in terms of the discrimination protection?
Yeah, exactly. So the definition of disability is very broad, and I'm sure you've heard us all talk about this before. The actual threshold for a disability is a relatively low level, both in physical and mental health. So the definition, firstly, includes reference to mental health. So it's a physical or mental condition that has an adverse effect on an individual's ability to carry out day-to-day activities and has lasted or will last longer than 12 months. So taking those in turn, well, it's certainly a mental health condition, a poor mental health, and that would need a definition, a diagnosis of maybe depression, anxiety, those sorts of conditions. An effect on day-to-day activities, well, day-to-day activities such as focus, concentration, maybe ability to communicate, ability to assimilate information, all of those things can be affected. A substantial effect, so it's going to have a substantial effect on day-to-day activities. Well, that's been defined by case law as anything other than trivial, so anything that really affects that person on those day-to-day activities, i.e. not being able to communicate fully on the telephone or maybe over Zoom or however you do it. And then 12 months, well, that's what's devilishly difficult about most health conditions, but mental health is very difficult, because once someone's diagnosed, it's very hard for the professionals, for the psychiatrists and counsellors and doctors out there to know how long it will take for that person to recover, how long they'll be on medication for, and therefore as an employer it's going to be really, really difficult. The other issue is, because of this historic stigma around mental health, there may be employees who've been suffering silently for a long time and not told you. So you could be in a position where it's the first time you as an employer have heard of this, but it's not the first time this has come up. Actually, this person could have been going to the doctors for years over a mental health condition. So I think the answer is nothing is automatically a disability. But actually it's a relatively low level when poor mental health does become a disability, and therefore as an employee you should tread relatively carefully when you when you look to deal with someone with a condition. And the safe advice is always err on the side of caution, provide the protections under disability discrimination legislation, and you are actually able to manage that employee just as much as you could ever manage someone previously, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later. But you're putting all of those protections and all of those steps in place to help.
Absolutely. And I think where some employers struggle is actually it's asking the open questions to enable you to understand what symptoms the employee is suffering from and how it's impacting their life, because sometimes there's a concern that you shouldn't probe too much when someone discloses that they are feeling ill to you. But equally, as the employee, you are expected, if you have a little bit of knowledge, you are expected to find out more, obviously being appropriately sensitive and respecting the employee's right to privacy as well. So it's that not making assumptions and genuinely trying to discover how you can help the employee and how they're affected. And obviously sometimes that might require then getting medical advice as well.
Medical advice is key, isn't it? You know, unless you are a doctor or a psychiatrist listening to this, you need that specialist medical advice and input to make decisions. So don't feel that you have to make decisions without the input of either a consultant, a GP, or occupational health are always a really good resource to discuss about how mental ill health is affecting the workplace rather than actually looking at it more broadly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think that feeds really well into our next question, which we often get asked, and it's a difficult one to answer, which is, well, if someone is disabled, what reasonable adjustments do you have to make to accommodate that? And there isn't a clear answer to that. It just depends on each situation. But as Claire said, I think usually you will be guided by the medical advice, because that is what the GP, or more particularly occupational health's role is. They are trained professionals to advise on how a condition is impacting someone at work and what reasonable adjustments might help them. So it's for the employer to consider what you can reasonably implement at work, but usually that process will be guided by the medical input, and that could be temporary changes. I mean, one of the most common way we see adjustments is a phased return to work. When you've had someone that's been off sick for a long period of time, usually the advice will be to ease them in gradually with a few hours here and there, building up to a full-time role. It could be more permanent changes to reduce their hours or their tasks, or perhaps provide some additional support in terms of allowing more time to consider things in writing or providing a mentor. So it really depends on what the medical advice is and what aspects of the employee's role they need additional support with.
Yeah, there's no one rule fits all, unfortunately.
No. Which in a way would be nice, but in a way would probably be more difficult as well. And one thing is, we would always ask for the employee's input. Again, you're not making these decisions in a vacuum as an employer. You would be sitting down with the employee to understand where they're struggling, what they think might help, and then getting the medical advice to inform your decisions as well. So it's rare that you're starting from a blank page. You will have that input as to what you think might work, and it's then working out how far you are able to accommodate those adjustments within the employee's role. I think what the pandemic has shown is that actually we can be quite flexible in how we do our jobs in lots of ways. It's just whether that's a longer term solution or not.
I guess sort of moving on to our next question, which is, what potential triggers should managers look out for? Certainly managers want to feel forearmed, forewarned, and try and predict things. Now, there are a lot of behavioural factors and there's a lot of guidance out there. What I think is a challenge, and Tabytha mentioned this earlier, is actually managing employees remotely. Yeah, a lot of the triggers are things that are much easier to understand if you're in the workplace together. So lateness, being withdrawn socially, working long hours, changing in working patterns, uncharacteristic reactions to their colleagues around them. Well, all of this is so much more difficult if people are working at home or working in a socially distanced fashion from each other. I find I don't know what Tabytha's working pattern is. I roughly know, but I wouldn't have an ability to really understand that. So there is really only honest conversations that can be done around that, and asking those open questions, which Tabytha talked about earlier. Really understanding what's going on. Now, we see with our clients kind of a common few situations, again, which are still really difficult to manage from home. But the first is the implosion. You have a member of staff who suddenly, as a manager, goes off sick, and you didn't even know that they had mental health conditions. That happens more frequently not. I think it's getting less common as we talk more about mental health, but certainly, don't know about your experience, Tabytha, but when I first started doing this job, it was the most common type of mental health sickness absence. The employer never knew about it until the person couldn't come into work anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you're kind of taken aback and wondering how you missed the signs.
Yeah, exactly. The other situation you see quite a lot is the impotent manager, which is a manager who knows something's not right, but doesn't feel empowered to talk about it, either through their own kind of limited experience. They're too fearful maybe that they're going to trigger a claim. And of course, I think the main rule there is actually, as an employer, you're going to be held more liable for not asking those open questions than you are for asking them. So ask the questions that you need to ask. The other kind of situations we see is the chronically embittered. I actually picked this up from a conference I attended a few years ago, and I can see Tabytha smiling on the call, because these are the employees that just spiral out of control. These are the employees that you have grievance after grievance being raised about, that you have emails coming in at 2 a.m. from them about situations, and you as a manager or HR professional are struggling to catch up with them. And that's because they perhaps are struggling with their own mental health, and they have lost perspective on the situation, and they are really difficult to deal with. I don't know if you've had any experiences of those situations.
Absolutely. And I guess that's why often managing mental ill health is more of a challenge than managing someone who's off sick with a bad back, say, because often the employee's ability to think logically and articulate their concerns is hampered by the symptoms that they are experiencing as well. So you are struggling as an employer to communicate effectively with them because of the condition that they are suffering from, which you don't tend to have in the same way with a more physical illness. So it's an added challenge to understand and manage that, and often that can be very stressful then for the managers involved. So it becomes a slightly self-perpetuating, where everyone involved is finding it very stressful to deal with, and it's difficult to see a way to resolve it to everyone's satisfaction once it gets to that stage.
And actually, there's a really good point along the way, and that's normally before it gets to us as the employment lawyers, around having a communication strategy with that employee, saying, okay, we need to understand the rules around communication and around how we're going to use vocabulary, etc. And sometimes an early intervention in that will save a lot of hours of heartache and a lot of hours for us as employment lawyers resolving situations.
And often that's where quite simple adjustments can help, like allowing someone to have a close family member or a friend present at key discussions to aid their memory and to give them perspective and to allow them to have someone to talk it through there and then can be really helpful. And looking at who they communicate with, and often having a kind of neutral third party within the organisation as a mentor who's not involved, but again can just be a sounding board to add other perspectives, can be really helpful to get out of that position where everyone's kind of stuck.
And I suppose this actually kind of moves on nicely to the next question, Tabytha. What should managers do if an employee discloses they are suffering from mental health?
I mean, again, I think the answer is quite simple, which is firstly, we just need to listen to what that employee is telling us. I think, again, a lot of the common complaints we see from employees is that they told their managers they were struggling and their managers didn't seem to care. And I think often it's not that managers don't care, it's just that they don't know what to do or what to say. So they kind of retreat backwards and say very little. But actually then if you can do your kind of empathetic listening to just acknowledge what the employee is saying to you, to take it all in and check your understanding of what they're saying, can just be all you really need to do. They don't have to come up with a solution straight away. It's not a case of solving the employee's problem, it's first understanding what they're telling you. And I think if a manager can just come away from that initial chat with a good understanding of how the employee is struggling, and with the employee feeling that they've had a sympathetic ear, then that's the best outcome of that meeting. And you can then go away as a manager and speak to HR or speak to your legal advisors, and then work out what we do next. But I think feeling that you have to have all the answers, you just don't. You just have to have that listening ear at first, and that goes a long way.
And I do think it's just being honest with the employee to say, I don't have all the answers, but I can certainly look into this and try and put together some form of plan. And just that honesty, hopefully reflecting that back really helps and starts moving the conversation along.
And I think it's then just, even if you're getting back just to report that you're still considering the options, or you fed back to HR or whatever, it's just keeping in contact with that employee so they don't feel that it's gone into avoid and you're not addressing it, but not rushing to have all the answers straight away.
Yeah.
And I think one of our final questions, Claire, was looking at that point where we have an employee that we've been helping with their mental ill health, and where it's causing performance issues, and how far we can still manage that employee. Because I think a lot of employers are then very cautious, and there's perhaps a perception that, well, if poor performance or issues at work are connected to mental ill health, we can do very little. So do you want to talk us through that side?
Yes, and I think there is a real common perception that once people talk about their mental health, that they can't be managed in any other way than kick gloves, in that sense, and that is really not the truth. You can still manage any of your employees in whatever situation they may be in. It's just how you strategize that management, and what sort of levels of consultation, support, and adjustment that you need to make through that management. So absolutely debunking that myth. Employees can still be managed, and if they are poorly performing, that can be managed. Now, there is obviously informal performance management, which is around coaching and kind of bringing people up to meet the standards that are required. And a lot of that is just about communication and maybe re-explaining issues to people. That can obviously go on hand in glove with the support that they need for their mental health. But if you do get onto a formal performance management process, you can still do that if somebody has poor mental health, but you will need the benefit of probably a medical report, a medical insight, so that you can put reasonable adjustments in place through that process. So consultation with the employee, the support that's needed, maybe some reasonable adjustments, maybe reasonable adjustments in relation to the time limits and the time scales in order to get to those targets, those performance improvement indicators. And you need to think about other options such as maybe redeployment, maybe taking a different role, all of those potential issues. So there definitely is a route through here. It's not easy, and it's really formed around supporting and returning someone to full effectiveness, but you certainly can still performance manage those people who have any sort of ill health condition, and includes mental health conditions.
Absolutely. And I think often the medical advice will agree that if there is some kind of issue at work that needs to be resolved, whether that is a performance issue or resolving an employee's grievance, that actually the best way forward for the employee will be to actively manage that. I think it's rare that we see advice that says an employee can't participate in that process at all. Very common for there to be adjustments to that process, like having the friend or family member or longer time at meetings or what have you. But I think generally the advice is if there's an issue, it's in the employee's interest as well to resolve that issue, isn't it? Because most of the time that's the key to improving an employee's mental ill health is to address whatever is causing them the stress at work.
Exactly, and avoidance isn't the way for long term resolution and to improve the entire situation. So I've seen numerous medical reports that say exactly the same thing.
And I suppose that's what we're saying as a whole, isn't it? That actually if we proactively manage these issues and we create an environment where people feel comfortable about talking about their mental health at work, then we should be spotting the issues in the first place. But we're creating that open environment where we're able to have these conversations and it becomes the norm, rather than managers kind of dreading the issue coming up and perhaps then avoiding issues, which is usually where they spiral and become a bigger problem for the organisation.
Yeah, I completely agree.
Okay, well, thank you for joining us for our podcast. I hope you found it useful. Claire is running a more detailed training session for managers and those working for HR teams on the 26th of May on managing ill health at work. So if you would like to join us on that course, or if you would like any further information on this topic, then please do see our website, which is parismith.co.uk, for more information. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.